Have you ever really stopped to think about how a star, that's 93 million miles away, manages to power almost every living thing you've ever seen? Well, today we're going to dive right into that incredible story. Photosynthesis, the process that literally turns light into life.
And I mean, have you really ever thought about it? That salad you had, the bread in your sandwich, heck, even the energy that was in that steak. Every bit of it started its journey as a little bit of sunlight captured inside a leaf. And what about the very air you're breathing in right this second? That oxygen wasn't always here. It is a planetary scale gift, a leftover from this exact same amazing process. Yeah, without it, our world as we know it just wouldn't exist. So let's get into it. Okay, first things first, let's zoom out and look at the big picture. Before we get into all the nitty-gritty chemistry, you gotta appreciate the sheer scale of this thing. Photosynthesis isn't just about a few green plants here and there. It's the engine that builds the foundation for pretty much every ecosystem on Earth. So the heroes of this story are called autotrophs, which is just a fancy way of saying self-feeders. These are our planet's producers: plants, algae, and even some bacteria. They perform what is basically a kind of magic, taking simple carbon dioxide out of the air and, with a little help from sunlight, turning it into the energy-rich molecules that fuel, well, literally everything else. Without them, there's no food chain, period. It all starts, as you'd expect, with catching a sunbeam. This first stage is all about taking that light energy and turning it into chemical energy, and it all happens on a crazy fast and microscopic scale inside a part of the plant cell called the chloroplast. It's a question we all asked as kids, and the answer is just so cool because it's the opposite of what you'd think. It's not that green is the most important color to the plant. It's actually the one color it doesn't really want. This graph right here tells the whole story. See, plant pigments, especially chlorophyll, are total pros at soaking up energy from the blue, violet, and the red parts of the light spectrum. But that dip you see right in the middle? That's green light. It's not very useful for energy, so the plant just reflects it away. And that reflected green light is what hits our eyes. So when you look at a green leaf, you are literally seeing the color of sunlight the plant rejected. And this isn't some new discovery either. Way back in the 1880s, a scientist named Theodore Engelmann came up with one of the most elegant and honestly beautiful experiments in all of biology to prove this very thing. His method was just pure genius. He laid out a single strand of algae, and then he shone light through a prism, so a tiny little rainbow was cast right over it. But here's the clever part. He then added bacteria that absolutely love oxygen. And since photosynthesis makes oxygen, all he had to do was sit back and watch where the bacteria went. And sure enough, they all swarmed to the parts bathed in blue and red light. He created a living, breathing graph that showed exactly which colors were powering the whole show. Okay, so the plant has captured the sun's energy. Now what? It can't just use that raw, light energy to start building stuff. First, it's got to convert it into a usable chemical form, kind of like charging up some tiny molecular batteries. Think of these two molecules as the plant's rechargeable power packs and its delivery trucks. ATP on the left, that's like a fully charged battery, just packed with ready-to-use energy. And NDPH on the right, that's more like a delivery truck carrying a special cargo of high-energy electrons, ready to drop them off at the construction site. Making these two molecules is the entire goal of this first phase. So where do the electrons for that NADPH delivery truck even come from? Well, this is where our oxygen story really begins. In a process called photolysis, the chloroplast uses the sun's energy to literally rip water molecules apart. It keeps the hydrogen bits and their electrons, but the oxygen, to the plant, it's just a waste product, so it releases it into the air. That waste is the oxygen you're breathing in right now. All right, so the batteries are charged, the delivery trucks are loaded up. Now it's time for the main event, the construction phase. This is the stage where the plant is going to use all that captured energy to grab CO2 from the air and build the sugar molecules that are the foundation of, well, almost everything. Welcome to the Calvin cycle. Now, I know this diagram looks really intimidating, but think of it as a blueprint for a tiny molecular factory. The goal here is simple. Use the energy from those ATP batteries and NADPH trucks to turn CO2 from the air into sugar. Let's break it down so it's not so scary. It all happens in three main steps. First, an enzyme called rubisco, which, by the way, is the single most abundant enzyme on Earth. It reaches out and grabs a CO2 molecule. Second, the factory caches in those ATP and NADPH power packs to turn that molecule into a simple 3-carbon sugar. That's our product. And this is super important, most of that sugar doesn't even leave the factory. It's used in step 3 to rebuild the starting molecule, so the whole cycle can spin around and do it all over again. So here's the crucial part. For every 6 of those simple sugar molecules that get made, only 1 gets to leave the cycle and become glucose or starch or something else. Just 1. The other 5 are immediately put right back into the factory to regenerate the starting parts, making sure that assembly line never ever stops.
Now, this standard process works great for most plants. But what about plants that live in really hot, dry places? Places where opening your pores to get CO2 means you risk losing a ton of precious water? Well, nature, as always, has found some really clever workarounds. Take C4 plants, like corn and sugarcane. They've got this awesome upgrade. They basically separate the process in space. They first grab CO2 in an outer cell, and then they actively pump it into a deeper, more protected cell to run the Calvin cycle. It acts like a turbocharger, just force-feeding CO2 to the cycle, which makes it way more efficient and saves a ton of water in the heat. And then you've got CAM plants, like cacti and succulents. They take a totally different approach. They separate the steps in time. They only open their pores at night when it's cool, and they store the CO2 they collect as an acid. Then, during the hot, sunny day, they seal their pores up tight to save water and slowly use that stored CO2 to make sugar. So smart. Okay, so let's zoom all the way back out. We've seen how plants build up and store energy, but the story isn't really complete until you see how that energy gets released. And that's where we find this absolutely beautiful symmetry at the very heart of biology. Just look at this table. It shows this perfect balancing act. On one side, you've got photosynthesis in the chloroplasts, storing energy. On the other, you've got cellular respiration in the mitochondria, releasing that energy. And notice this. The products of one process are the exact reactants the other one needs. It's a perfect complementary cycle. It really is the ultimate cycle of life. One process builds and stores energy in complex molecules, while the other carefully breaks those molecules down to release that energy and power, well, everything. It's this elegant, planetary scale energy exchange that connects every single plant and every single animal. So, from a simple ray of light to the incredible complexity of life, photosynthesis is the engine of our world. It solved the planet's energy crisis billions of years ago. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? As we face our own energy challenges today, what lessons can we learn from a humble green leaf?